Morning, it's Mel, butterfly lady. Just out in my garden looking for some eggs. I found two. To see that one tiny little one there and one here. It's unusual to find two on the same leaf, but here we are. Most of what I grow is swamp milkweed. There's one here. So I look on the bottom of the leaf. Oops. Usually they're on the bottom, not always, but usually. And they kind of stick up. Kind of like a football, or like a half a football. And that's how you know it's a monarch egg. And there's usually only one on the leaf. And like I said, it's usually on the bottom. So you can just pluck the leaf off, or you can break the leaf in half. Like I could break it off here and just take half of it. It's totally up to you. This one here is a pretty small plant. So in this case, I might just whip off part of that leaf. It's hard to do it with one hand, but I also, if I was prepared, I would have come out here with my hole punch, and I just use a hole punch to punch that there, so you just can rip off just that part of the leaf. Oops, hard to see. Most of my milkweed is swamp milkweed. This pink here is swamp milkweed. I've also got some orange here that the rabbits love, so that's why there's mesh around it. I have some white. This here is called Joe Pie weed. The butterflies like the nectar that they can get from the flowers. And I have some more pink swamp milkweed and white here. And then this one here is a common milkweed, the kind you find in parks and ditches. The difference is these ones have long, skinnier leaves, and these ones have fatter, wider leaves. The common milkweed tends to, it can take over a little bit more, so I actually have been starting to pull those out of the garden in favor of keeping swamp milkweed. I happen to have a butterfly enclosure that a friend of mine built for me that's all screened in, just some old scraps of wood and an old screen. It's actually way bigger than I need, and I go back and forth to the cottage, so I often have little travelers instead. This is what I started with, and this is perfectly sufficient. It's just a tray from the dollar store, a tomato cage that I bent the legs over and just wrapped it with some tooling, then closed it with some clothespins. When I find eggs in the garden or little babies, I put them in these little condiment cups, holes in the lid. It's really important that they've got air, otherwise the leaves will go moldy and they won't have enough oxygen. So don't put them in a jar or a glass container with a lid on tight. You can buy little mesh things like this, or you can buy like bug catchers at the dollar store, but you need to make sure that if you put them in something like this, that they're not gonna crawl through these holes. I do keep some mesh on there as well to help keep out earwigs or anybody else that might be looking to eat them. You can also use takeout containers just with eggs and babies. And then once they're bigger, they'll go into one of these bigger containers. When they're ready, they'll crawl up to the top to make their J and turn into a chrysalis. But it's definitely important to have them in something when they become a butterfly. We don't keep them for very long anyways, so I will actually take this chrysalis out of here and put it somewhere else, because a butterfly can't climb on the sides of a slick container like this, or a slippery container, so hard plastic or glass is not the best. So it's always better to have them in some mesh, which is why I have these little clips here. So I've learned how to take the chrysalis off of here very carefully, and I will clip it onto here or here, so that when it closes or emerges as a butterfly, then it can climb up the mesh, and it will hang to dry for a few hours, and then when it starts flitting around the cage, then it's ready to fly away. So I just literally take the lid off, and it usually flies out. If not, I let it walk on my hand and fly from there. In here we've got a few teeny tiny ones. There's one on the lid, so you gotta be very careful that you don't throw anybody in the garbage. So each morning I will come out and I check to see if they need any new leaves. There's one there. Oh, there's a couple there. And I will see all the little black specks there is the poop. I'll clean that out, give them some fresh leaves. If the container's starting to look gross or there's this morning there was some condensation on the lid. So I'm gonna clean this whole container and I'll put them in something fresh because I don't want them to get mold or mildew in their environment. Occasionally you'll get 2 eggs on a leaf. There's one here and here's one here, but if I can zoom in without the leaf curling up. This one, see that black tip at the edge? That means that there's a caterpillar in there that's almost ready to hatch. So the black spot is actually the head, and it will come out and it will eat the egg first. That's the first meal, and then it will start eating the milkweed. And here we have a tiny one. There's my thumbnail in comparison. It's a tiny little one who obviously just hatched. So there's the black head, tiny little body. It comes out of the egg and then it turns around and goes back and eats the shell for the first meal before it starts eating any milkweed. So I've got some eggs on some leaves. Usually I just rip off the piece that has the egg on it and put it in one of these little containers because it's going to take a few days for them to hatch in this state. And so to me, it's kind of like I'm wasting the rest of that leaf. So I'll either use the rest of the leaf. You can see here I've pulled off the 2 spots where there were eggs, and I'll either feed that to the bigger ones or I'll put these in the fridge and they keep for several days. I also label my containers so I know how many caterpillars are in there so that when I'm cleaning the cage, I don't lose any of them. I also throw all my garbage into like a little pot, like all the poop and the eggs and stuff, because every once in a while I miss a teeny tiny one, and at least this way it's not going to starve. There's stuff in there for it to eat, and as it gets bigger I'm going to see it in that pile. I also keep a container of like mystery eggs because I'm not 100% sure that these are monarchs, and if they're not, like that one there on the far right looks suspiciously not like a monarch, and I would hate for that to hatch and have it be a spider or some other kind of caterpillar that's going to eat my monarchs. This was the first one I found this year, so July 6th. That was a bit late, I thought, but anyway, I found it at the cottage. I always write down, if I can, when it turns into a chrysalis, when it pupates. That way I know when roughly it's going to emerge as a butterfly. So the extra milkweed, I had a plant that I had to pull out because it was growing in the lawn. I rinsed off these, instead of throwing them in the garbage, I rinsed off the leaves, let them kind of dry out a bit. I got this cloth wet, wrung it out really, really well, and I had put this in the fridge like this with the lid on, and they've been in the fridge for 3 weeks and they're still good.